You've probably heard the phrase before, maybe in a meme, maybe as a jab. He's got Peter Pan syndrome, rolling their eyes at a 35-year-old who still lives at home, refuses to work a steady job and spends his weekends gaming or partying like he's still in college or school even. But what does that actually mean? Is Peter Pan syndrome even real? Is it medical diagnosis? Where does it come from? And what happens to people who just can't or won't grow up? Welcome back to On The Verge. Today we're diving into a topic that's often misunderstood, oversimplified, or just straight up mocked in pop culture. But it's far more serious and far more common than many people think. We're talking about something called the Peter Pan syndrome. So let's start with the definition of it. So first, let's get something straight. Peter Pan syndrome isn't an official mental health diagnosis. You won't find it in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, often called the Psychiatrist's Bible. The DSM is what clinicians use to diagnose conditions like depression, anxiety disorders, or ADHD. If a syndrome doesn't appear in that book, it means that officially it doesn't meet the criteria of a clinical disorder. There's no insurance code for it, no standard treatment pathway, and no checklist or symptoms you can formally get assessed for. But just because Peter Pan syndrome isn't official doesn't mean it isn't real. This is one of those psychological concepts that lives in the grey space between pop culture and clinical observation. It was first introduced by Dr. Dan Kiley, an American psychologist, in his 1983 best-selling book called The Peter Pan Syndrome: Men Who Have Never Grown Up. Kiley noticed a recurring pattern in the men he worked with. They were charming, likable, and funny, but also emotionally stunted, commitment phobic, irresponsible, and terrified of growing up. They were physically mature but emotionally stuck in adolescence. And so he named the pattern after the boy who famously refused to grow up, which was Peter Pan. At the time, Kylie's book was a cultural hit. It struck a nerve. Many people, especially women in relationships with these men, felt it put words to something they'd been witnessing but couldn't quite explain. Men who ghosted when things got serious, men who dodged responsibility and then blamed others when things fell apart, men who thrived on fun and freedom but recoiled at routine, sacrifice, or adult partnerships. But even beyond romantic relationships, the idea resonated in broader society, especially as Western culture began shifting in the late 20th century, with prolonged adolescence becoming more normalized, thanks to no longer time spent in education, delayed financial independence, and cultural shifts around marriage and careers. Over time, the term Peter Pan syndrome became shorthand for anyone, usually, but not always, men who refuse to take on the roles and responsibility traditionally associated with adulthood. Clinically speaking, Peter Pan syndrome isn't recognized because it doesn't have a consistent syndrome, and it doesn't have consistent symptoms to be measured and studied in the same way as, say, generalized anxiety disorder or bipolar disorder. But many therapists and psychologists still encounter Peter Pan type behavior regularly. It overlaps with other psychological patterns like avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, narcissistic tendencies, or even trauma-related immaturity. And so Even though it's not in the DSM, many professionals acknowledge it as a useful descriptive framework, a way to talk about a very real set of behaviors and emotional patterns that have serious impacts on relationships, careers, and also well-being. So, what is Peter Pan syndrome, really? Uh, at its core, it's the inability or deep unwillingness to grow up. Not physically, of course, but emotionally, socially, and psychologically. People with Peter Pan syndrome often avoid adult responsibilities, resist emotional um, intimacies, struggle to commit, and tend to act impulsively or selfishly. They may lack long-term goals, financial independence, or the ability to regulate their emotions like mature adults. Think of it as emotional adolescence stretched far past its expiry date. And no, it's not always just man babies. While Kylie originally focused on men, we now know that people of any gender can experience those patterns. It's just that the way it manifests might differ depending on cultural norms and expectations. There's a deep discomfort with adulthood, not just its responsibilities, but the identity that comes with it. People with Peter Pan syndrome don't just fail to grow up, they actively resist it. Adulting feels like a trap, a boring, soul sucking, joy killing machine of bills, jobs, commitments, and compromises. And so they retreat into what feels safe, the comfort of youth. Now, let's pause for a moment. This isn't about shaming anyone, because when you scratch beneath the surface, Peter Pan syndrome often has roots in trauma, anxiety, or deeply unmet needs. No one wakes up one day and says, you know what, I'm just never going to mature emotionally. It's more complex than that. Many people with Peter Pan traits come from homes where they were either overprotected or neglected. On one end, helicopter parenting creates adults who don't know how to make decisions or cope with failure. On the other, neglect can lead to emotionally immaturity because the child never had the chance to develop healthy coping skills or stable self-worth. Now, in both cases, the person may develop a deep fear of responsibility because responsibility feels like danger, like pressure, like inevitable failure. Excuse me. There's often also a connection to avoidant attachment styles. People with Peter Pan syndrome may struggle to form and maintain healthy relationships. Commitment feels claustrophobic, vulnerability feels unsafe. Instead, they chase newness, fun, surface level excitement, anything to avoid the messy depth that real adult connection requires. Now, we have the cultural layer. So, we live in a world that romanticizes youth and dreads aging. Think about how we market everything from fashion to tech to health. It's all about staying young, fresh, forever 21. Adulting, on the other hand, is the butt of every joke. Taxes, mortgages, shoot me, marriage, ball and chain, parenthood, game over. We mock and meme adult life so relentlessly that it starts to feel like something to avoid at all costs. Plus, let's be honest, the economic landscape isn't helping. Stagnant wages, soaring rents, student debt, a brutal job market. Owning a home or starting a family feels out of the reach for millions of young adults. So when older generations scoff and say, words like, why won't these kids grow up? Well, the answer is grow up into what? A system that feels rigid, unaffordable, and jobless and joyless? No thanks. But here's where Peter Pan syndrome becomes a problem. Not just for the person living it, but for those around them. In relationships, people with Peter Pan tendencies often leave partners feeling exhausted. They may avoid conflict, dodge responsibilities, or rely on too heavily on others to carry the emotional load. Long-term plans are hard to make when one person refuses to face the future. In the workplace, these individuals might underperform, lack accountability, or constantly shift the blame. They may avoid feedback or struggle to work within structured environments. And for parents still supporting their adult children well into their 30s and 40s, it can create a kind of emotional burnout. Yeah, love turns to resentment, boundaries blur, the parent becomes more of a roommate or a life manager than a caregiver. Now, how to deal with Peter Pan syndrome? Ah, interesting. Well, first comes recognition. If you're watching this and thinking, wow, this is me, take a breath. It's not about shame, it's about awareness. And awareness is the first step to change. Ask yourself this: am I avoiding adult responsibilities out of fear? Do I rely on others to clean up my messes? Do I sabotage relationships when they get serious? Do I have long-term goals or just fantasies? If the answer is yes to any of them, the next step is support. Therapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy, can help unpack the fears and beliefs keeping someone stuck in emotional adolescence. Sometimes there's trauma to process. Sometimes it's about building skills, financial literacy, emotional regulations, goal setting. Often it's both. If if you're in a relationship with someone showing Peter Pan tendencies, boundaries are key. Compassion is important, but enabling won't help them grow. You can support someone without carrying them. You can love someone without shrinking yourself. It's also worth noting that there's a flip side to Peter Pan syndrome, something called Wendy syndrome. Now, that's when a partner, often a woman, though not always, takes on the role of caretaker, manager, or emotional fixer in a relationship. They What they do is they clean up the messes. They remember the appointments, they cover the bills, they soothe over the tantrums, and they do it quietly because they've been conditioned to believe that that's their job. But Wendy syndrome is just as harmful because it enables the dysfunction and keeps both people stuck. So let's return back to the Peter Pan metaphor. In the J.M. Barrie's classic tale, Peter Pan is the boy who never grows up. He flies, he fights pirates, he has adventures, he's charismatic, free spirited, and fun. But look closer and you'll see the cracks. Peter is emotionally stunted. He forgets people the moment they leave. He doesn't understand or return love. He runs from responsibility, and his world, Neverland, is a fantasy. A place without consequences where time stands still. It's not real. And that's the real tragedy of Peter Pan syndrome. Not just the refusal to grow, but the price of staying stuck. Because when you live in Neverland, you miss out on the beauty and richness of real life, of growth, of depth, of connection that comes with age and experience. Sure, of course, adulting is hard. There are bills and heartbreaks and spreadsheets, but there's also self-respect, stability, real love, meaningful work. There's purpose. Growing up doesn't mean giving up joy. It means learning how to build joy that lasts. And again, we I always give my final thoughts. Maybe something you can look into further. So, what do we do as a society with Peter Pan syndrome? First, we stop mocking it because jokes don't heal trauma. We create spaces for emotional development, not just academic achievement. We teach coping skills, communication, emotional literacy, and self responsibility early and often. We support parents without shaming them. We hold space for men to talk about their fears without losing their masculinity. We stop expecting people to we stop them use just that figure it out at 18 and start acknowledging that adulthood is a process, not a switch you just flip. Second, we challenge the systems that make growing up feel impossible. We fight for fair wages, affordable housing, accessible mental health care, and policies that give young people a chance at real independence. Because when the future feels like a cliff instead of a staircase, no wonder people climb to the safety of childhood. Excuse me. Finally, we extend grace because everyone grows at their own pace. Some of us had the tools, some of us didn't. Some are still learning, but the goal isn't perfection, it's progress. If you're someone with Peter Pan syndrome, I just want you to know this. Growing up doesn't mean becoming boring. It means becoming whole. It means finally taking the wheel of your own life, and that's not a loss, it's a liberation. So, thanks for watching. If this video resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, comment and subscribe for more deep dives into the real issues behind modern life. And remember, you don't have to be perfect to grow. You just have to be willing to. So, until next time, please take care and keep going.